The old mechanic's hands froze as his flashlight illuminated something hidden in the tank's interior, a metal box that had no business being there. After decades of restoring military vehicles, he knew every inch of these machines, but this was different. Someone from the past had left something behind, waiting for the right person to find it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty yard of the restoration shop as the old mechanic wiped sweat from his brow. At 63, his calloused hands still moved with the precision of a surgeon when working on engines. The military surplus auction had been a gold mine. 3 vintage vehicles, including an old Sherman tank that the younger mechanics had deemed beyond repair, now sat in his specialized workshop. The old man ignored the doubters. He had served as a tank mechanic during the desert conflict 30 years prior and had developed an almost supernatural connection with these machines. What the others saw as junk, he recognized as treasure with stories to tell. The Sherman was in particularly rough shape, with rust eating through its hull and an engine that hadn't fired in decades. The colonel from the local military museum had specifically requested the veteran mechanic for this job. "If anyone can get her running again, it's you," the officer had said with respectful confidence that made the mechanic stand a little straighter despite the arthritis in his spine. The museum needed the tank operational for the upcoming Memorial Day parade, but that was still 6 weeks away. Plenty of time for a man who had rebuilt engines under enemy fire. The younger workers at the shop rolled their eyes whenever the old man spoke about machines having souls, but they couldn't argue with his results. Vehicles that other shops had declared dead would purr like kittens after spending time in his care. His workshop stood separate from the main garage, a sanctuary of tools accumulated over 40 years and military memorabilia from his service days. The Sherman tank dominated the space now, its presence commanding respect despite its dilapidated condition. On the 3rd day of working on the tank, the mechanic discovered the first anomaly. While removing a damaged panel near the driver's compartment, his flashlight caught something unusual. A small metal box had been welded to the interior hull and then painted over to match the surroundings. It wasn't part of the original design. He ran his fingers over the cold metal, feeling the subtle irregularities beneath decades of grime. Someone had hidden this deliberately, and done a professional job of it too. Only a person who knew these vehicles intimately would have noticed it didn't belong. The box was sealed tight, resistant to his initial attempts to open it. The mechanic set it aside rather than force it, turning his attention back to the engine. The tank had stories to tell, but they would come in their own time. Patience was something he had learned to value over the years. Some problems couldn't be rushed, some secrets revealed themselves only when ready. By the end of the week, the engine block had been completely disassembled, each part meticulously cleaned and inspected. The radio from the tank sat on his workbench, another project entirely. As he worked late into the night, the quiet of the small town wrapped around his shop like a comfortable blanket. Only the occasional passing car disturbed the rhythm of his tools against metal. The boy showed up on a Saturday morning, rolling up on an old bicycle with a lunch bag in hand. "My grandfather asked me to bring you this," he said, handing over the simple brown paper sack. The mechanic recognized him as the grandson of his old service buddy who lived on the other side of town. Inside the bag was a sandwich, an apple, and a thermos of coffee, still hot. "Your grandfather knows I'm working on a Sherman?" the mechanic asked, accepting the lunch with a grateful nod. The boy shrugged. "He said something about tanks having long memories." "I don't know what that means." The mechanic smiled. "Tell him thanks. And tell him he's right about the memories." After the boy left, the mechanic turned back to the mysterious box. With fresh determination, he carefully worked at the seal with the precision tools he used for delicate engine components. When it finally gave way, he felt a rush of anticipation. Inside lay a weathered envelope in a small leather pouch. The envelope contained a handwritten letter, the ink faded but still legible. The pouch held a set of dog tags and a brass key unlike any military issue he had seen. The letter began simply, "To whoever finds this, I hope the war is long over." The writer identified himself only as a sergeant who had commanded the tank during the final months of the Second World War. The letter described how his crew had discovered something unexpected during the European campaign, something that had haunted them even after returning home. The sergeant explained that before the tank was decommissioned, they had hidden another compartment containing evidence of what they had witnessed. The brass key would open it. The mechanic glanced at the tank, wondering what secrets it still held. The letter ended with coordinates and a cryptic warning: "Some truths are buried for a reason. Judge carefully whether this one should see daylight." Sleep eluded the mechanic that night. His mind raced with possibilities. By morning, he had resolved to continue the restoration work while searching for the second hidden compartment. The colonel would visit in 3 days to check progress, and the engine needed to show substantial improvement by then. The following days blurred together as the mechanic divided his time between legitimate repairs and his increasingly obsessive search for the hidden compartment. The coordinates in the letter referenced a specific panel in the gunner's position, but extensive examination revealed nothing unusual. The mechanic began to wonder if the letter was some elaborate hoax or perhaps the delusions of a war-weary soldier. When the colonel arrived for inspection, the mechanic had the engine partially assembled and could demonstrate that the primary systems would function once completed. The officer seemed pleased with the progress but noticed the distraction in the older man's demeanor. "Everything all right? You seem troubled," the colonel observed as they stood before the partially rebuilt tank. The mechanic hesitated, then made a decision. "Did your museum research the history of this particular Sherman before acquiring it?" The colonel raised an eyebrow. "Standard procedure. It saw action in the European theater with the 4th Armored Division. Participated in the Battle of the Bulge and the push into Germany." "Why do you ask?" "Curious about the machines I work on," the mechanic replied, deciding to keep the letter to himself for now. "Any chance you have the crew manifest from when it was in service?" "I can look into it," the colonel said. "But I doubt those records survived. Most of those men would be gone now anyway." After the colonel left, the mechanic returned to the tank with renewed determination. He brought in additional lights, illuminating every inch of the interior. The brass key weighed heavy in his pocket. It had to fit something. The breakthrough came 3 days later when the mechanic removed the gunner's seat completely. Behind it, concealed by a false panel that had been expertly crafted to match the surrounding metal, he found a small keyhole. With trembling hands, he inserted the brass key. It turned with surprising ease, as if the lock had been recently maintained. The hidden compartment was shallow but contained several items: a small journal, a roll of film and a metal canister, and a map marked with locations in Germany. The mechanic handled them with reverence, aware that he was touching history that had been deliberately hidden for over 7 decades. The journal belonged to the tank commander and contained daily entries from January 1945 until the end of the war. Most entries were typical soldiers' notes about weather, terrain, and enemy movements. But in late March, the tone changed dramatically. The entries became erratic, sometimes just fragments of thoughts. The commander described finding an abandoned research facility in a remote German forest. His unit had been separated from the main force during a chaotic engagement and stumbled upon the facility while seeking shelter. What they discovered inside had shaken the entire crew. The journal described experiments being conducted on prisoners, but with a focus that went beyond the known atrocities of the war. The German scientists had been working on something the commander referred to only as the displacement, with cryptic references to doors where no doors should exist and men who returned changed. The tank crew had collected evidence, including documents and the roll of film, before being ordered to rejoin their division. According to the journal, They had reported their findings to intelligence officers but were told the matter would be handled by specialized units. Days later, those same officers informed them that the facility had been destroyed in an artillery strike, and the matter was classified. The commander's final entry revealed why he had hidden the evidence. They're lying. We passed by 2 days later. The facility was intact. Someone doesn't want this found. We swore as a crew to keep the evidence safe. Maybe someday the world will be ready for the truth. The mechanic sat back against the workshop wall, the journal in his lap. Outside, the small town continued its peaceful existence, unaware of the disturbing history now resurrected in the quiet shop. He thought about his own time in service, about the things governments kept hidden from their people. Some secrets stayed buried because the truth was too difficult to reconcile with the stories nations told themselves. The old radio from the tank suddenly crackled to life on his workbench, startling him. He had been cleaning it earlier but hadn't connected any power source. Static filled the workshop for several seconds before fading to silence. The mechanic stared at it, the hairs on his arms standing straight. After a moment, he carefully returned the journal, film, and map to their hiding place and locked the compartment. That night, the mechanic called his old war buddy, the grandfather of the boy who had delivered lunch. "Remember how we used to talk about tanks having souls?" he asked when his friend answered. "Found something in that Sherman, didn't you?" his friend replied, his voice knowing. "How did you guess?" "That tank matches the description of one my uncle served on in the Big War." He never talked much about his service, but he once told me they had seen something that changed them all. Said they left evidence inside their tank before it was decommissioned. "I figured if anyone would find it, it would be you." The mechanic described the hidden box and compartment, the journal, and the film. "What should I do with it?" he asked. His friend was silent for a long moment. "What does your gut tell you?" "That some doors should stay closed. But also that history deserves to be remembered, even the uncomfortable parts." "Then you already know the answer." The next day, the mechanic returned to work with clear purpose. The Sherman's engine was coming together nicely and would be operational within a week. As he worked, he made a decision about the hidden evidence. He would complete the restoration, allowing the tank to serve its purpose as a memorial. The hidden compartment would remain, its secrets intact but not forgotten. When the museum curator arrived to check the final progress, the mechanic handed over a sealed envelope. "This contains information about a historical feature of this particular tank that might interest researchers. I'd suggest waiting until after Memorial Day to open it." The curator looked curiously at the envelope but nodded in agreement. "We trust your judgment." On Memorial Day, the Sherman tank rolled smoothly in the parade, a testament to American engineering and the skill of the old mechanic who had brought it back to life. The mechanic watched from the sidelines, aware of the hidden history riding through the streets. The crowd cheered for the veterans and the restored piece of military history, unaware of the darker truths it contained. 2 weeks later, the mechanic received a visit from a serious-looking man in a government vehicle. The man introduced himself only as an agent interested in historical preservation. They sat in the workshop, drinking coffee from chipped mugs as the agent explained that the museum curator had followed instructions and shared the letter detailing the hidden compartment. "Some stories from that era remain sensitive," the agent said carefully. "But times have changed. We believe the full historical record should be preserved, even the uncomfortable parts." The mechanic studied the younger man's face, looking for deception but finding only professional interest. The crew believed something was being covered up. "That was a different time," the agent acknowledged. "Today, we're more interested in documentation than denial. With your permission, we'd like to properly preserve and analyze what you found." The mechanic considered this request. The tank had carried its secret for over 70 years, passed from one guardian to another. Perhaps it was finally time for the story to be told. On one condition, the mechanic said finally. The museum gets copies of everything, and the findings become public record. No classifications, no redactions. The agent hesitated, then extended his hand. I'll need to get approval, but speaking personally, I believe that's the right call. After the agent left, the mechanic returned to the tank, placing a hand on its metal flank. The restoration was complete, but he felt the story was just beginning. Like all the vehicles that passed through his shop, this one had found its voice again. Some machines carried people into battle. Others, it seemed, carried truth through time, waiting for the right moment to reveal what they knew. The old mechanic smiled, satisfied that this particular tank would continue its mission of remembrance in ways even its original crew might not have imagined. This is the end of this video. I recommend you to subscribe. And for similar stories, I recommend you watch this video. Thank you.